In today's shocking episode of Brainspill, we are going to find out how somebody managed to survive the electric chair. Something which was clearly meant to unalive somebody. This is a pretty shocking revelation. So, how on earth did somebody survive such a horrifying, traumatic ordeal? Let's find out today. Hello! Welcome to Brainspill, laziest show on the internet. My name is Tank, and who is this miracle man we're talking about today? William Francis Kemmler, an American criminal, was convicted for the murder of his common-law wife in the year 1889. After being found guilty, he was sentenced to death via execution to the electric chair. The background of this is pretty straightforward, but it's later on where the story gets really interesting. William didn't have the best upbringing. With his parents being both alcoholics, he pretty much followed in their footsteps, as he was known as a troublesome alcoholic himself. He was convicted of first-degree murder on the 10th of May. 3 days later, he was sentenced to death, destined to be the first person to be executed in an electric chair under New York's new execution law, replacing hanging with, well, electrocution. Yes, the first of its kind, and our man just so happened to be the first person who was going to be sitting in this electric death chair. Yes, prepared just for him in the Auburn State Prison. And yes, as you might imagine, the introduction of such a horrifying way to kill somebody was very, very controversial. So controversial, in fact, that the leading developers of electric power at the time were very against the act and didn't want their electricity to be used for executions. A lawyer filed an appeal claiming the electric chair violated the 8th Amendment's prohibition of cruel and unusual punishment. And if you want to know the outcome of that appeal, the execution went ahead on the 6th of August 1890, so there we are. Prior to this day, the chair had been tested for a number of years prior, and it was deemed ready for purpose. So, early that morning, William was whisked up from his slumber at 5 a.m. He was dressed with a suit and necktie, and was basically fed his breakfast there and then. He was offered a prayer, shaved his head, and took him sharply through to the room in order to execute him. So, you might be wondering, what does one do when you're about to be put into an electric chair? What do you do? What do you say? I mean, I wouldn't know. But fairly sure William didn't either. Particularly that this was, well, the first time this had ever happened. Well, Kemmler's words to the witnesses were, "Gentlemen, I wish you all good luck. I believe I'm going to a good place, and I am ready to go." Well then, let's see about that, shall we? The man was reportedly very calm when he got into the chair and pretty much did so without resistance, almost like he either knew what was coming and that there was no point in resisting, or perhaps that day he knew that he was going to be shown some mercy, maybe? Either way, the man seemingly was not too fussed about the fact that he was about to be put into this electric chair. He was sat in the chair and the metal restraints were placed on his bare head. The switch was thrown and 1,000 volts of electricity came surging through the chair. This was assumed at the time to be enough to cause cardiac arrest and pretty much end the unfortunate soul that sat in the chair. So, how did they know this? They apparently tested it on a horse beforehand, because a horse is a completely perfect recreation to what it would be like for a human to be put into the same situation. I can guarantee that. Anyway, the chair was switched on for a period of 17 seconds, and after it was switched off, William Kemmler was declared dead. However, William was not dead, and in fact he was still breathing despite the fact he just had 1,000 volts of electricity flow through him for 17 seconds. A physicist approached and inspected to confirm if this was the case, that if he really was still breathing. To which he immediately ordered for the switch to be pulled again in order to make sure that William actually died because of the chair. So they flicked it again, but this time gave him 2,000 volts of electricity, for quite a bit longer this time. It was reported that blood vessels under his skin began to rupture and bleed, and some witnesses claimed that his body caught fire. Some witnesses even reported to the New York Times that an awful odour began to spread across the chamber, which must have been pretty nasty, especially after witnessing a man almost burst into flames. The smell must have been pretty nasty given that it was described in such grisly detail, some of which I won't be saying in this video, but you could presume the worst of what would happen if somebody was in this situation. Basically, they were talking about the fact that the chair was almost used to cook with. I'll let your imagination do the rest, but yeah, it's not a great description. So yes, this entire process took about 8 minutes in total, and whilst he did eventually die, it does raise a lot of questions as to, well, A, how ethical this is, and B, how effective it is compared to hanging, what was the previous form of execution in the States. So yeah, this wasn't a real good first impression. An autopsy was undertaken shortly afterwards, which found that the blood vessels in his head, where his skull is, had carbonised, resulting in the top of his brain hardening. This just shows the extent of what he went through for a period of time where he was actually still alive and seemingly, I imagine, aware of what was going on. Nasty stuff. So yes, this is horrifying, but you know what? It was the first time. So you would have hoped that they would have learned their lesson, made a few tweaks, and made it so the whole process was as quick and painless as possible, and that surely something like this would never happen again. Well, there's an entire list online of botched attempts, so I'm going to read you a few examples because no, they clearly didn't learn their lesson. Yes, there has been a handful of events similar to this with botched attempts. It is estimated that in the United States, that 3% of all executions carried out between 1890 and 2010 were botched, resulting in 84 out of 4,374 electric executions being botched. And yes, 3% isn't a massive figure, but when we're talking about someone being executed, I'd say that's a pretty big margin for error. I mean, this is someone being put on the electric chair, for crying out loud. Just as a few examples, Frank Koppler on the 10th of August 1982 in Virginia was reported by his attorney that it took 55 seconds to do the job, resulting in his head and legs catching fire and smoke filling the chamber. On the 22nd of April 1983, John Evans in Alabama was put to the chair, to which sparks and smoke came out from under his temple. Doctors who were testing his heartbeat reported that it took 14 minutes to finish the job. On the 16th of October 1985, William Vanderveer from Indiana was administered 2,300 volts and was still breathing, which took 17 minutes, according to his attorney, for the entire affair to conclude, in which he specifically said that this was outrageous, with the Department of Corrections even admitting that the execution did not go as planned. And this is just a few accounts. There are so many, and the statistics I gave you were just for the electric chair. As you are probably aware, in the US there are many different forms of, well, execution that they use, and there's many more botched attempts for the other methods that they adopt as well. So yeah, these aren't just a few isolated incidents we're talking about. So yes, when I say that somebody survived the chair, I'm not talking about somebody that was superhuman and completely unaffected by this. I'm talking about people that were on the chair, suffered as a result of it, and that these were botched attempts in which something that should have killed someone fairly quickly took much, much longer than it should have. So again, this raises the question, can you really cheat death, or is it just a matter of people botching things again and again and again? Well, I'll let you ponder that one a bit further yourself. If you guys enjoyed that video, here's another one just like it. I'll see you guys in the next video. Fantastic.